Hi, shalom friends. I'm a firm believer that Hasidic stories actually are not only inspiring and uplifting, but they're educational and they're very much germane and relevant. Let me share with you an extraordinary story. One of the remarkable Hasidic leaders in the late 1800s was Rabbi Ahron Borenstein, a great Hasidic leader, a tremendous Torah scholar, a saintly man, etc., etc., etc. Actually, his Hasidim, which means those that followed him, he didn't have them in the tens of thousands because he was actually quite demanding of his Hasidim. He insisted that they be Torah scholars and maximize their potential before coming to him for advice and blessing. One of his Hasidim was, I'll make up the name, his name was Yerachmiel. He was a business person, spent maybe 2-3 hours every single day studying, and he was a very fine Jew and a very devoted Chassid. He would go to his Rabbi, Rabbi Ahron Borenstein, who I will call the Avnei Nezer, that's the name of his book. So he comes to the Rabbi, and as a true Chassid, he firmly believes that the blessings of the Rebbe are very effective in heaven. Rachmiel had health, he had a wonderful wife, and he had a very flourishing business. What he did not have was the happiness of children. And after 2-3 years of marriage, he was, under pressure from his wife and from himself. And he began to ask the Rebbe, every time he saw him, Rebbe, I would love a bracha for children. His holy Rebbe, who he admired and revered, never gave him a straight answer, would often change the subject or refuse to deal with it, or gave other wonderful blessings such as good health and shalom bayis, may you live in harmony. And he was obviously someone who believed that the Rebbe was deliberately avoiding the issue. So as a chassid, he understood that he has to wait for some type of opportune time where even if in the ordinary state of matters, the Rebbe would not give a blessing, maybe in an extraordinary time, the Rebbe would. Now, one of the most important prerequisites of giving a blessing is to be in an exalted, happy mood. Just as God cannot be found in depression or sadness, a blessing given when a person is depressed cannot help. Consequently, the happier and the more uplifted a person is, the more effective the blessing. So what is the happiest day of the year? You might think Purim, or the rejoicing of the Torah, Simchas Torah. So Rachmiel decided to visit his Rebbe the last days of the holiday, and he participated in the joy of dancing with the Torah. And in the height of that joy, the night of Simchas Torah, when he saw his Rebbe's face suffused with joy, and he was really way beyond the confines of ordinary, he went over to the Rebbe and he said, Rebbe, I request a blessing. I will not leave until you give me a blessing for children. And the Rebbe looked at him with his holy eyes and told him, do you want a bracha to have a child who's a priest? And Yerachmiel blanched, didn't say a word, left, and stopped asking for blessings for children, because somehow his holy Rebbe saw that were he to have a child, that child would become a priest, which essentially would mean he would reject the faith of the fathers. That's not a child he wanted to bring into the world. So sadly, he saw this as a final sentence. I will not have children because the Rebbe doesn't want to give me a blessing of a broken heart. And he told that to his wife. Well, eventually the holy Rebbe passed on, and his son, who was a very worthy successor, his name was Shmuel, and he wrote a book called Shem HaShmuel. He took over the Rebbe, and all of the Hasidim quickly transferred, I shouldn't say transferred, just continued their allegiance because the son was an extraordinary, holy, wise individual, different than his father, but no different in terms of his spiritual capacity to bless and advise. Rachmiel now is a little bit older. He's in his late middle ages, I don't know, late 30s, maybe early 40. And he's there, and it's Simchas Torah. And It's such a joyous time. Many of the Hasidim brought their children. So it was just a wonderful family time, dancing and rejoicing. And there was only one person who couldn't put his whole heart into it. That was Rachmiel. He had no children to dance with. He had no children to put on his shoulders. He had no children to lift, to kiss the Torah. And he had no children to teach Torah. So though he was participating, there was part of him not there. And the holy Rebbe, Reb Shmuel Borenstein, sees him. And he runs over to him and he says, Simchas Torah, rejoicing with the Torah, where's your joy? And he didn't wait for an answer. He says, I know you're sad about not having children. I want to give you a blessing to have children. I will say the blessing, you will say Amen. And for a moment he was startled. And he said to the son, who was the acting Rebbe, he said, but Rebbe, your holy father told me that he does not want to give me a child who will be wearing the garment of a priest. Reb Shmuel heard this and stopped for a moment, closed his eyes, and fell into a deep reverie. Moments later, he opened up his eyes and he said, I still want to give you the bracha. And please answer Amen. Well, if a blessing from a tzaddik, from a righteous person, so the Shem Hashmuel gave a bracha to Rachmiel, may God bless you with children in the plural. And of course, Rachmiel answered Amen, and he was completely uplifted and confident. And sure enough, he goes home, tells his wife that we have a divine assurance of children. And to make the long story short, he actually had 5 sons, which brought him infinite joy after many years of not having any children. Well, this leads us to the beginning of the 20th century. And as we all know, World War II broke out. World War II was preceded by literally a decade of anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. And Rachmiel died just when the anti-Semitism was growing. His children lived through the war. I will not go into the details of their suffering, but it was murder, torture, and everyone suffered horribly. His I think it doesn't say which number son, but I believe it was his youngest son. I did not give him a name, so I'll give him a name, Shimon. The youngest son, Shimon, was very talented with languages, spoke German and Polish fluently with the right inflection, and was always interested in ancient languages. So not only did he know Aramaic besides the biblical Hebrew, but he also knew Latin. When the persecutions came and Jews had to try to find a way to escape, it became more and more difficult from being confined to a ghetto to wearing the yellow star. Wherever they were identified as Jews, which meant they were a target. This Shimon, who knew languages, somehow, I don't know if he stole it or it was given, but he came friendly with a priest who enjoyed the fact that this religious Jew knew Latin and actually gave him the garments of a priest. This Shimon survived 2 years in Nazi-held territory by masquerading as a priest. After the war, he obviously took off those garments, went to Israel, married, had children, and the story that I'm telling you was printed and told over by Rabbi Zilberstrom, who knows the family. So, what do we get from this story? A lot. But I'll start with the main point. One holy tzaddik had a vision of a Jew wearing the garment of a priest. If you were to ask a person, what do you think that means? Our first and immediate response would be, sadly, this person would have rejected Judaism and accepted another faith, and now he's becoming not only a non-Jew, so to speak, in action and in belief, but now he's actually perpetuating the faith that we do not believe in or subscribe to. But the second tzaddik saw a Jew in the garment of a priest, but somehow transformed that, not as a person who was going to cut himself off from Judaism, but somehow the Jew in the garment of the priest was going to use those garments to save the life of a Jew, which would eventually continue to perpetuate the traditions and the holiness of the family and of the traditions. The power to transform a vision, a very negative vision, into a positive. So besides the fact that we're overawed by the holiness of these individuals who somehow were able to see intuitively perhaps something that was going to take place in the future, and especially the first tzaddik, the first righteous man, who only wanted to give a revealed good to his chassid, in addition to that, there's this concept of, even if you have a vision of a holy person who actually sees something happening, it doesn't necessarily have to remain in the superficial vision. It can be transformed. Which leads us to today. Today, it's been already almost 3 months of this horrible virus with the quarantine. It's been already 3 months where the economy is, no one knows where it's going and what the solution will be. Currently, there's a lot of unrest and lawlessness in the street, and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I mean, how much worse can it get? And if you had this vision 2 years ago, what would you think? You would think the world was falling apart. But what happens if you had that vision and you said of people stuck in the home and you saw them studying Torah and reaffirming family bond? If you saw them not capable of going to work, and then you saw them saying to one another, life is more important than work, and when God, in God's grace, when we go back to work, we're not going to put in more than 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, because in the last 3 months we see that we could live without it and find solace and meaning without work. There's something very special. If you were to look at the homes that have been redecorated, or hobbies that were reaffirmed, or sports that were reintroduced, you would say that this period of horror is actually what we would call the silver lining. There's something that good that can come from it. And even the lawlessness which we are experiencing, which is absolutely unjustifiable, that in itself becomes a lesson that people without a religious background will act contrary to civilization. Civilized people will act uncivilized because the police and the authorities wrong them. But there's still a God. God said, do not murder. He said, do not loot. He said, do not pillage. He said, do not rape. He said, do not hurt the innocent. If you have that background, then none of this would be happening. So friends, we can't change what's happening. We could transform it. The choice is in our hands. Shalom.